Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
MashaAllah, Sheikh Saab, looking fresh in the morning?
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Am I audible? Am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, we can begin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasuli Rabbil Alameen. Wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in amma ba'd. First of all, I would like to warmly welcome all of you to this international webinar hosted by the Department of Hadith and Related Sciences at the Islamic University in Kerala, India. Because we have a truly global audience today, I want to say good morning to Shaykh Muntasir Zaman and everyone joining us from the USA. Good afternoon to Dr. Shoaib Ahmed Malik and our attendees from the UK. And good evening to everyone joining from India and the surrounding regions. For those who are joining us for the first time, allow me to briefly introduce our host institution. My name is Adil Muhammad, and I'm a postgraduate scholar in the Department of Hadith. Darul Islamic University was established in 1986 and has since grown into a premier Islamic university in India. We now have over 30 affiliated colleges and 6 off-campuses across different states of India. What makes our university unique is our integrated syllabus, which bridges traditional Islamic sciences with modern academic knowledge. Today, we have over 3,000 graduates contributing to various universities and institutions worldwide. We operate under the visionary leadership of our Vice Chancellor, Dr. Baharuddin Nadwi Star. He is a renowned scholar who has been recognized among the 500 most influential Muslims in the world since 2012. And he has authored many works, including a translation of the Holy Quran. As we all know, you all know the purpose of our gathering. Our topic is the height of Prophet Adam at the crossroad of science and scripture. To help us navigate this profound subject from both classical Hadith perspectives and modern scientific viewpoints, we are deeply privileged to have 2 exceptional scholars with us today. Firstly, let me introduce Shaykh Muntasir Zaman. He is currently an instructor at the Qalam seminary, specializing in Hadith studies and fiqh. We have greatly benefited from his academic works, including his research on the methodology of Sahih Muslim and his brilliant translation of Dr. Mustafa Azami's Introduction to Sahih al-Bukhari. Our another panelist, Dr. Shoaib Ahmed Malik, who currently serves as a lecturer in Science and Religion at the University of Edinburgh. Remarkably, he holds dual PhDs, one in chemical engineering and another in theology. He has authored significant works in the field of science and religion, most notably his book on Al-Ghazali and the modern evolution paradigm. So, MashaAllah, may Allah bless both of you for your continued efforts and immense contribution to our Ummah. So, before we dive into the main presentations, I would like to both of our esteemed guests to share a brief opening remarks with our audience. Let us first hear from Shaykh Muntasir Zaman, and immediately after we will hear from Dr. Shoaib Ahmed Malik. Shaykh Muntasir, you can go ahead with your brief opening remarks.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hopefully my audio is clear. I just want to begin by extending and expressing my immense gratitude to Darul Huda, and in particular the Department of Hadith Studies and Related Sciences for, mashallah, what was taking quite some time, long overdue, but I am very happy to see the audience. I'm even more elated to see the initiative that y'all put together. I have so many friends, students, colleagues from Karela, and hearing about the university for the first time. And I was, then I did some research, and mashallah, it brings me great joy that y'all have, you know, decided to invite myself, somebody so insignificant. But I do hope that this conversation is beneficial. Even more excited is the fact that I have Dr. Shoaib with me, somebody who I haven't had the opportunity to reconnect with in a long time. But mashallah, it's definitely heartwarming. I'll pass it over to Dr. Shoaib.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'd like to extend my incredible gratitude to the Department of Hadith Studies, Hadith and Related Studies. And just echoing what Shaykh Muntasir said, it's an honor and privilege to be here. I look forward to engaging with everyone here. But I would like to say that the honor is mine to be next to the I think Jonathan Brown calls him the masala guy, the one who makes masala out of Hadith Studies, mashallah. So it's the pleasure's all mine, alhamdulillah. The pleasure's all mine. Sheikh Hafid, I think your audio is blocked. We can't hear you. See?
Okay, am I audible now?
Yeah, now you're audible. Yeah.
Okay, thank you both of you for those warm open words. It's truly an honor to have you together on this platform. So we will now move directly into the first part of our section. I invite Shaykh Muntasir Zaman to begin his presentation, exploring the classical textual and transmission hermeneutics of the academic traditions. Shaykh Muntasir, the floor is officially yours. You can go ahead.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وبعد. Again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to the esteemed host, institution, organization, department, and the audience. As I want to reiterate again, the privilege and honor is truly mine to be able to share some words with an esteemed audience and co-host that honestly brings a lot of joy and happiness to me, inshallah. The topic that I have is exploring the classical hermeneutics on what apparently seems a trivial question, right? The height of Prophet Adam alayhi salam. I remember when I published the book, some 5 years ago, the first question somebody commented on was, what's next? The size of the Ark of Noah. And I said, wow, mashallah, being facetious on such a serious topic, but I don't blame the audience when their first reaction is one of confusion and bewilderment. Why care about the height of a prophet? But anyone who's dived deeply in the subjects of Islamic studies, be it fiqh, hadith, aqidah, it's kind of what we call the tip of the iceberg. When you look at a question as benign, as basic as the height of Prophet Adam alayhi salam, lurking behind the scenes is a number of serious questions, some epistemological, some philosophical, some scientific, some religious, some history-based, some hadith-based, some worldview. It's a very jam-packed, very, dare I say, inflated topic that needs unpacking. So I always like setting the stage by reminding the audience, the readers, that when we investigate the height of Prophet Adam alayhi salam, what we're really doing instead is teasing out the conflict between revelation and empirical knowledge. Revelation and empirical knowledge. Historically, the conflict generally revolved around reason and revelation, aql and naql. This is clearly expressed in the Qanun al-Ta'wil from Imam Ghazali to Fakhruddin al-Razi. Very famously, Ibn Taymiyyah, he has his Dar'u Ta'arud al-Aqli wa-Naqli. So the way the debate is often centered is reason versus revelation. And that's because they were pontificating over the qualities, the attributes, the divine nature of God, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's Sami', istawa ala al-arsh, yadullah. So these concerns were much more of a rational nature. In the modern day, we now transition into less of a rational concern, more into empirical and who knows what's next. We're rapidly evolving. So in our current stage, science, scientific concerns, as mashallah, Dr. Shoaib will tell you, he's an expert on the field. Evolutionary biology seems to be at the top of people's concerns. So science is one of those more concerning topics, which now pushes us. And mashallah, I know I'm speaking to students and scholars and people who are there, which makes us investigate this topic in a way where we can kind of like archaeologists go to the past and try to pick out a methodology that is both true, genuine to our past, but also relevant and helpful in the present. And this isn't too difficult because when you look at the scholarly literature, yes, rational concerns tended to be at the forefront. We still have a number of people dealing with empirical concerns. And we're going to get to that, inshallah, when I give a basic overview. So the topics that are usually interconnected here, and I don't have the luxury of getting into too many details, I'm going to try to keep it within 20 minutes, inshallah, is something known as the Isra'iliyat. How much of what we know to be the height of Prophet Adam alayhi salam, or anything else for that matter that is concerning, is borrowed from biblical, Talmudic, Near Eastern folklore? That's one discussion. Another discussion, and I think this is the more important discussion, is if the scholars of Hadith developed a framework of tasheeh, tad'if, i'lal, authentication, weakening, finding defects, are we allowed to fine-tune, refine that methodology based on new findings in the present? So if a hadith is sahih in Imam Bukhari's Jami', can I use some modern findings to reassess whether there could be a new illah that previous scholars hadn't found? And I think there is a lot of leeway, because what's the ultimate purpose of a naqd al-hadithi? A naqd al-hadithi is, how do we look at a historical report and using our, dabt, adala, ittisal, shudud, nakara, illa, how are we able to find out if there's errors? Where if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this world, the laws of physics, the laws of science, and the Prophet alayhi salam, وَمَا يَنطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَى, he doesn't speak from his own will, what he says may not always be a scientist speaking, but it will never be contrary to the basic laws of physics, which now makes us reassess the transmission, especially in the case of a khabar wahid, where we then see if a khata or a waham occurred in the transmission. Now, some people may assume, why are we bending backwards for science over here? Why do we even care what science has to say? Is there a concern? Thomas Kuhn very famously talks about a paradigm shift. Maybe our modern understanding of science needs to be reevaluated instead of reevaluating the hadith. And what I do is I look at, okay, let's see, is there anything in the hadith literature to support this argument that Adam alayhi salam was sittuna dhira'an, which translates as 90 feet tall, 60 cubits. And this is, as I will show later on, definitely isolated with Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, and even then with some of his students. Which brings up the question of adalatul sahaba then, that how do we treat the issue of the sahaba being upright and our primary transmitters? Okay, now, when you look at these questions of archaeology and science, I could say, as an amateur reading the subjects, and Dr. Shoaib will be much more qualified as this is his field, the scientific literature is near unanimous on the subject that, and even archaeologists, that number one, human height based on the remains of humans has fluctuated anywhere between 4 to 6.5 or 7 feet, generally speaking, and that's being very generous. 4 to about 7 feet is the lower end, and the higher end that you will find. If you look at skeletal remains, if you look at homes, if you look at artifacts and items that people were using. Number two, if you take it from a scientific angle, there's a plethora of concerns, starting with the square cube law. Can a body be that large and capacitate the weight of the bones and the density? The idea of pumping blood, oxygen, brains. How can you be bipedal and still be 90 feet tall? Because when you're thinking 90 feet, think about like a 2 or 3 story building. This is the size of the largest dinosaurs that we have as well. So scientifically and archaeologically speaking, there is sufficient grounds to say this is a concern worth dealing with. And I want to be clear here. Just because the science says something doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater. We immediately run and say, oh, the hadith is unreliable, Islam is unreliable. Na'udhu billah. That's not what we're saying. My point here is it's enough reason for us to pause and go back into the workshop and see what can we do to tease out the details and come to a more reasonable conclusion. And this is where the classical framework comes into play. The classical framework of mushkilul hadith, of what we call mukhtaliful hadith, starting with like Imam Shafi'i, Ibn Qutayba, Imam Tahawi, the books on this abound. The framework, there's some disagreement on this, but the general outline that we see is, what we do is, whenever we have a concern, what is that concern? Could it be between a hadith and gender norms, a hadith and worldview, a hadith and science, a hadith and history, a hadith, so on and so forth? You have a responsibility as a bahith, as a researcher, to now determine what exactly is the point of conflict, because sometimes we're looking at conflict and none exists, and we need to look into and see whether there's an actual conflict between the adilla. Is there an actual ta'arud? Maybe there is no ta'arud. And the framework that classical scholars speak about, usually it involves the following four. You start with jama'. Number two is tarjih. Number three is tawaqquf. And I add this as number four only because it's not too relevant here, but it's naskh, abrogation. Well, I call it the three-tiered approach. What is the three-tiered approach? The three-tiered approach is, how do we first and foremost try to reconcile, right? When we say خلق الله آدم وطوله 60 ذراعا, that the Prophet ﷺ mentions, as recorded in the Sahihain, that Adam alayhi salam was created with a height of 90 feet, roughly 60 cubits. And then in the ending you have فَلَمْ يَزَلْ الْخَلْقِ يَنْقُصُ بَعْدَهُ حَتَّى الْآن, that human height has been decreasing ever since. So you have like two concerns over here. How do we reconcile this? And again, I want to repeat, let's not focus on the granular specifics. Let's try to develop a framework that can be applicable to this hadith, also to the hadith of Sujood al-Shams, also to the hadith of the mu'jizat of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so on and so forth. Okay, so the first is jama'. Jama', as the students of hadith would be aware, is how can we reconcile? Maybe there is no conflict. So Abdul Rahman al-Muallimi, who he's a very famous scholar of hadith, Maulana Anwar Shah Kashmiri, another famous scholar of hadith, they propose that perhaps this was a phenomenon that occurred in Jannah, meaning خلق الله آدم وطوله 60 ذراعا. Adam alayhi salam was created with a height of 60 cubits, 90 feet, but that was in Jannah. When you come to earth, now the laws of physics change. In Jannah, you're not bound by any laws. Allah can create it outside of our earthly laws. So he could have been 90 feet tall. That's one explanation that they give. And there's a list of other possibilities. Is sittuna dhira'an mubalagha, kind of like sab'een, the word sab'a. And again, I'm not here to give an answer. I'm here for us as students to think that perhaps what's happening over here is this is an explanation of a hadith where it's both true to the tradition, that it's the height of Adam alayhi salam. We're not even rejecting the hadith, we're just doing takhsis. We're doing takhsis and saying that this hadith is very specifically applicable to Jannah. When the Prophet Adam came to earth, his height was what we would call customarily 6 feet, 5 feet, whatever it may be, but larger than the average. The problem with the ta'wil or the jama' is that you have to contend with the last part of the hadith. فَلَمْ يَزَلْ الْخَلْقِ يَنْقُصُ بَعْدَهُ حَتَّى الْآنِ. How does that make any sense? And Mufti Taqi Uthmani in his Fath al-Mulhim, he tries to give an answer by saying that فَلَمْ يَزَلْ الْخَلْق is more talking about istimrar than it is talking about tanaqus. And he has this argument that he gives, and I push back on the feasibility of that argument in my book, but we can get to that later. The second approach to ta'arud is tarjih. And this is, I would argue, the more difficult of the different options. Tarjih is, let's look at both sides, and if one of the two sides is epistemically stronger, if one of the two sides has more weight backing it, then we will have to give preference to it. And when we look at the two sides of the ta'arud, on the one hand, you have the science, the archaeology, the knowledge that we have, the empirical data. And on the other side, you have this hadith. The empirical data is very strong. It's very strong. Unless you have this revolutionary understanding that we don't know right now, it's very strong. But on the other hand, you have the hadith. The hadith comes in the Sahihain, and I've traced about 70 different turuq of the hadith. 70, 75. By the way, 70 isn't mubalagha over here. It's actually an actual number. I just playing on words. But there's 70 different routes of the hadith. And when you look at all of them, it seems it comes from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, it comes from Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, it comes from Ubay ibn Ka'b, it comes from many Sahaba. But the idea of sittuna dhira'an authentically seems to only come from Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, which in and of itself is not a concern, because the position of the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah regarding the Sahaba is they're all udul, right? There's adala of the Sahaba. But when you look at his students, even then there's some disagreement. Some of his students narrate this hadith without the contentious parts of sittuna dhira'an and فَلَمْ يَزَلَ الْخَلْقِ يَنْقُصُ بَعْدُ حَتَّى الْآنِ. That in and of itself isn't enough to dismiss the hadith. But when there is a conflict between two data points, this lessens its epistemological status. This means that its dhanniya, its presumptive nature, is much more cloudy than the scientific data that we have, because of which we can now give tarjih to the data and say likely a khata occurred. It could have been mudraj from one of the rawis. It could have been a waham, whatever term that we want to use. I'm not necessarily pushing for this. I'm giving this as an option if this is what's more satisfactory for people. Now, the argument pushback to this is you were talking about the Sahihain. These are vaunted collections. How dare we do something that classical scholars have not done? And I think we need to remind ourselves here that even Imam Muslim's Sahih is filled with examples of ta'leel, right? Shaykh Hatim al-Auni, Shaykh Ibrahim al-Lahim, famously Shaykh Hamza Malibari. I'm assuming y'all are familiar with the works of Shaykh Hamza Malibari. He does enough tremendous work to talk about Sahih Muslim and how Imam Muslim engages in ta'leel. He'll show mistakes here and there. And starting with Abu Bakr Ismaili all the way to Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, engaging critically with the Sahihain. Remember, it's not qat'i. We need to be balanced over here. On the one hand, we do realize the shubuhat and the munkirina hadith and the objections that they have, and we're not trying to throw out the baby with the bathwater. But on the other hand, if there's a wording over here or there's a mistake over there, we can always look back on it. Just in the interest of time, I'll carry on more quickly. The third is the concept of tawaqquf. What is tawaqquf? Tawaqquf means, tawaqquf over here means that I will suspend judgment. I will never claim that as a scholar of hadith or any subject that I've encompassed everything there is to be known. وَمَا أُوتِيتُ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا, right? We know very little. And as time progresses, so much of what we did not know, we begin to understand better. So when we look at a conflict, we could just simply say, Wallahu ta'ala alam. We don't know. And nor are we obliged to know. And I think this is a very safe approach, knowing that وَفَوْقَ كُلِّ ذِي عِلْمٍ عَلِيمٍ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of knowers. And maybe I may not understand, and somebody can resolve this concern in the future. This is the three-tiered framework that is applicable throughout, and I think we can apply it here as well to a large extent. Now, some concerns that people usually bring out, right? Could this not have been a miracle? Are you not a Muslim who believes in miracles, right? We believe that the sea was split by Musa alayhi salam. We believe in things that otherwise defies physics. So why not do the same over here? And to that, I respond by saying, yes, kharqul aada, the suspension of the laws of physics is possible, but it's not something that we take recourse to nilly-willy. We don't just jump and say that, okay, this was a miracle, that was a miracle. There are certain conditions. It needs to be qat'i. The motivation needs to be there. And more importantly, a mu'jiza is a one-off occurrence. It's a one-off occurrence that, okay, Musa alayhi salam, he split the sea. The Prophet alayhi salam, from his Mubarak fingers, water gush forth. Things like that. This hadith isn't saying a one-off occurrence. It's telling us to suspend everything that we know about science and archaeology, because it applies to Adam alayhi salam, his progeny, and it continues for centuries. Then other concerns are, what about a paradigm shift? Well, yeah, if a paradigm shift does occur, then we'll reassess the data, but we don't have a magical globe to just peer into the future. We don't have ilmul ghaib. We're just trying to make sense of the data that we have. There's much more that can be discussed over here. I'm going to respect the time that was given to me. And before I wrap up, I'm just going to summarize over here. The topic of the height of Adam alayhi salam is more of a hook than it is the main subject over here. We as Muslims, and particular students of knowledge, and more particularly students of hadith in the modern world, what are we trying to do? We're trying to make sense. As Maulana Abul Hassan Ali Nadwi very famously said, he says that, how can we do jama' bayn al-qadim al-salih wal-jadid al-nafi'? That how can we look at the past, see what is beneficial, excavate what we need, and then marry it, blend it to what is relevant to the modern day. And I feel if we dig in our tradition, we'll be able to find responses and solutions to our modern problems. I just looked at the issue of the height of Prophet Adam alayhi salam by seeing, can we reassess aqal and naqal to now aqal and modern empirical sciences? What's the framework that is provided? What is a three-tiered approach? And how can we respond to concerns of mu'jizat and the limits of scientific inquiry and so on and so forth? We didn't dabble too much into the issue of Israeliyat because that's somewhat unrelated to the topic at hand, but that is equally relevant. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward everyone who participated. I know it's a little late there in India, and I know Dr. Shoaib has so many commitments, but he came over here. May Allah reward everyone. Anything I said right is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anything I said wrong is from myself and shaitan. Barakallahu feekum, and I'll pass it over.
MashaAllah. Thank you so much, Shaykh Muntasir Zaman, for the deeply insightful presentation. You have laid a brilliant foundation for us regarding how classical scholars understood these texts. You have presented how the Mishkal forms the prescribed hadith, and how we can deal with three methodologies of Jam and Tarteel and Tawfiq. So before we move forward, I want to quickly remind our audience that we will have a dedicated Q&A session at the very end. Please note down your questions for those of our esteemed guests, as we will make them after this next segment. Now we will shift our focus to the theological and scientific dimensions of our topic. I'm very happy to invite Dr. Shoaib Ahmed Malik to share his perspectives and insights. Dr. Shoaib, we are eager to hear from you. The floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I hope all of you are well and in good health, inshallah. I'd like to thank Shaykh Muntasir for an excellent presentation. My ideas will follow largely from what he said, but corroborated from a different perspective. So just by way of introduction, I don't focus on hadith. That's not my area at all. My focus is mostly on ilm al-kalam. And the way I go about doing science and Islam is what I refer to as tatbiq al-kalam. It's the application of ilm al-kalam in the modern discourse. And I'm also of the opinion that we have a lot of great ulama behind us. We have Fakhruddin al-Razi, we have Ghazali, we have these great luminaries. But we also need to respect them by showing how not just their conclusions, but their methodology can still speak to concerns today. And I remember, again, just what Shaykh Muntasir was saying. I remember I was in a class with one of my sheikhs. His name is Shaykh Ali al-Iraqi. He's a Maghribi scholar. He's a Moroccan scholar. And he said something to me when I was still very early in my learning. And he said to me, Shoaib, our turath is not for the museum. And it's not just there for historical purposes. It's meant to be alive. It's meant to be relevant. It's meant to be applicable. And that stuck with me since then. And since then, I've been trying to find a way to make sense of the world through our own tradition. And I found a lot of security and safety through the Ilm al-Kalam corpus. My initial engagement was evolution, precisely because evolution, at least 20 years ago, was one of the biggest reasons for Muslims leaving Islam. I know several Muslims have left Islam because of evolution, right? I remember when I used to be a PhD student at Nottingham. When you're a khatib, people come up to you with problems, right? And sometimes there'll be parents who say, my son or my daughter has left Islam because of evolution. How do you deal with this? So when I started looking into science or religion, I learned about how this field works, because the Muslim representation in this space is very minimal. It's now coming slowly to the fore, but as a field, science or religion is still a new field. And it's very much Christian-centric and Eurocentric. Muslim voices are very few and minimal at the moment, despite some people having written on this since the 1980s and even before. And I remember that when I finished my MSc in Science Religion, I did it online. One of the first things that I wanted to do was, okay, I now have an idea of how science religion works, but how can I as a Muslim speak to this? And that's why I started writing on Islam and evolution, which eventually got published into this book, Islam and Evolution, Al-Ghazali and the Modern Evolutionary Paradigm. And here I had a couple of objectives. The first thing, what I wanted to do was showcase that even if you have a scholar whose ideas were written 1,000 years ago, those ideas are still applicable today, right? Now, of course, there's some negotiation process. You have to bear in mind that Imam Ghazali, he's writing in a world which is geocentric. The earth is in the middle and the planets are around. Today, we don't live in that world at all. They had certain presumptions about what are the fundamental units of reality. So for them, it was the four humors: fire, right? Coal, heat, air. All of these things were base periodic tables. Now our periodic table is very different. We have hydrogen and we have helium. So when you compare the scientific terminology understanding of the day and with ours, it's almost different worlds altogether. But it is in learning what they were believing at the time and how they're engaging their doctrinal issues through which you are able to learn the manhaj, the methodology. And that's what I wanted to do through Imam Ghazali. So for me personally, I spent a lot of time with Imam Ghazali. He's a very clear writer. He's very accessible. He's very respectable. He has authority both in the seminary as well as in the universities. And so he was a scholar of great interest. And I remember going through his iqtisad, and I found a lot of ideas that just made perfect sense. And one of the things that I feel that the Turath engages really well in is that it differentiates between hukm aqli and hukm adi. Hukm aqli are those things that are logically possible, right? These are boundaries of what we can conceive of. But hukm adi are to do with the laws of nature that we observe. It's based on repeated experiences that we have. Science is a part of that equation. And I remember when I finally understood the distinction between hukm aqli and hukm adi, then even the whole narrative of Richard Dawkins started crumbling in front of me. Because as a former scientist, I remember I'm a Muslim, I believe in miracles, but I'm also a scientist and I believe in laws of nature. How do I combine these two? And this is the dilemma most young STEM students, Muslim STEM students face today. Most Muslim STEM students do not know how to square this circle unless you have this theological grammar behind you. And I remember that Richard Dawkins, who was a big face of new atheism has trickled down now, but I think that back then, 20 years ago, it was very live. It was very much in your face. And he convinced an entire religious cohort that you are either a religious person or a scientist, but you cannot be both at the same time. And I wanted to question this. I'm like, why does he think that that is the case? And this is where I think Ilm al-Kalam provides a very useful basis on the difference between your physics and your metaphysics. What are your first principles and what are scientific principles? And here I find that scholars like Ghazali can provide a really clear account. In the topic of evolution, one of the things that I found very clear was that if you actually look at the theory of evolution through Ilm al-Kalam, a lot of it is completely possible. Yani, by the qudra of Allah, could He create us through evolution? Taban, for sure, right? It's just that evolution has become so tightly linked with, ilhad. It's become linked with communism. It's become linked with political revolutions. It's become linked with social revolutions and all kinds of isms that I feel that we forget to sometimes apply the whole box of ilm al-kalam. Because if you want to say something is problematic because it conflicts with our beliefs, your primary axiom is this something that I can believe or not through the prism of ilm al-kalam? And this is where your Ash'ari principles or your Maturidi principles come in. I'm an Ash'ari. I'm not a Maturidi scholar. I'm personally an Ash'ari scholar. So that's why I felt, okay, let me try and see if I can apply Imam Ghazali's principles. Now, the theory of evolution has three basic principles. It has three very basic principles. One, the earth is really old. Two, this idea of common ancestry, that all of life is biologically linked. Here, there's a clear tension point with the story, the waqi' of Adam alayhi salam. Clearly, there's a problem there. And then you have the mechanisms, natural selection and random mutations. And the first question is, are all of these metaphysically possible, yes or no? Is it jaiz aqlan am la? And for me, very clearly, these are all jaiz. These are all mumkinat. All of these are mumkinat. And anything that is mumkin is something that Allah can do. It is not something we believe is impossible for Him to do. So that's the first filter that I wanted to clarify. Are any of these metaphysically problematic? Are any of these really something that violates our principles? Definitely not. Then the second question comes down to is this scripturally problematic? Now this resonates with what Shaykh Muntasir was saying, that this idea of aql and naql, this is where you get the real tension, right? And I wanted to know, Muslims believe that there is a prophet, Adam alayhi salam, there is a wife of the prophet, Hawa alayhi salam, and these two individuals is where we have a connection with all of us. We have a nasab that goes back to both of these individuals. Okay. Now the question is there anything problematic scripturally if we had some kind of ancestry with the rest of the biological world? And I say that there are three ways going forward here. The first way going forward is it theologically possible if you want to reject evolution? For sure, no problem. That is totally fine from a theological angle. No problem there whatsoever. If you wanted to accept evolution, but you want to say humans are an exception, so Adam alayhi salam and Hawa alayhi salam and their descendants, if they do not have any connection with the rest of the biological world, fine, no problem. You can also believe in human exceptionism. But then the idea that I developed through the work of David Solomon Jalajal, who himself trained in South Africa, he himself came up with this proposal. He said that, well, okay, we have this principle known as tawaqquf. What exactly are Muslims committed to? Muslims are clearly committed to the idea that there is an individual called Adam alayhi salam. If you reject this, you're rejecting the Zahiri reading of the Quran. This is clear rejection of very clear ideas. If you have to clearly accept Eve, Hawa alayhi salam. You have to also accept that all of us have a lineage going back to those two. But does Adam alayhi salam, is there any mention of when he existed? Nothing. We don't know when Adam alayhi salam existed. Could have been 15,000 years ago, could have been 200,000. Wallahu alam, we don't know. We don't know. Then there's the more sensitive question now. And here the question is, if we don't know when he existed, could it be possible there are other hominins or human-like entities around him? Again, the Quran and Hadith are silent about this. And then the third question that follows from that is, well, could Adam's descendants have interbred? Is that a possible thing, yes or no? Now, and I say there's no problem here as well. So long as all human beings today can trace their lineage back to Adam alayhi salam, it's absolutely fine. Now, and something that I found out later, even after writing the book, was the fact that even in our own Turath, this is one thing that I'm working on right now, we have this very famous discussion about humans and jinn interacting. And even this is in all books. Ibn Abidin talks about it, right? Ibn Taymiyyah talks about it. The books of the Shafi'i books talk about it. The Maliki texts talk about it. They even talk about insanul ma, having relationship with insanul ma. So if those things have been discussed by our ulama at a very considerable level, I think the thesis of Adamic exception is nothing in comparison to these discussions. And this is the way, at least, I thought of, okay, maybe there's kalam here. Maybe we can have discussions here. The key thing is, personally, I do not care whether Muslims are creationists or human exceptionists or Adamic exceptionists. That's not my concern at all. My concern was, can we bring the Turath to light where we can start having conversations? That is the key thing. I wanted to show that our tradition is still relatable. It's not something that's 1,000 years old. It still can speak to today's concerns. But at the same time, I believe it's not an exact copy-paste. I think we need to critically engage with it. As I said earlier, I'm currently working on a text on Ma'alim Usul al-Din. Razi is in a world, Fakhdin Razi is in a world where he's engaging with Avicenna's ideas. Avicenna is in a world where he has a certain understanding of the cosmos. His understanding of al-Kawn is different to ours today. So this idea of copy-paste does not apply anymore. So, and this is where I think that, Muslims should have the courage to be able to engage the Turath in the way that is critical but relevant. And I just wanted to, provide that as an access point for many Muslims today, the STEM students, the ulama, if they benefit from this, but just to showcase that it can still speak to today's concerns. And I feel like the space of science and religion, or Islam and science, allows those access points. Alhamdulillah, we have ulama working at the University of Edinburgh. We have also scientists working at the Edinburgh. We just had a recent PhD student. She's Azhari, and she's doing her PhD on AI now, artificial intelligence, for example. We have another student who is doing on evolution. We have another student who's doing on climate change. All of these are new masail that we need to look into. And I think that we need to have this openness to say, here are some problems, here are some new discussions. Let us have a start to this kalam. And I think this was the project of Tajdeed al-Kalam. This was the eventual project. When these ulama of the past, particularly in the last century, like when we talk about Abdu, for example, what he was trying to do, I feel, was really just try to open the door for people to start discussing. And he realized that these books are great. Our ulama are great. No one is questioning their authorities. But we need to also respect them by showcasing that their methodologies is what we're holding on to, not necessarily their conclusions, which are the past, right? I'll share one last example, which I picked up, a few months ago, which I think helps me understand that, we have to understand history for what it is, and we have to understand the contemporary questions for what it is. In the Shafi'i madhab, I'm not sure about the Hanafi madhab, but in the Shafi'i madhab, there is this question of baras, right? Leprosy. And there's a discussion about if you have any vessel, any pot that is not gold or not silver, so anything like copper, for instance, if you have wudu water outside in this vessel, and if there's sunlight there, you cannot use it anymore, right? The reason why they said that is because their understanding of metals is different to today. They believed impure metals, anything that is not gold, anything that is not silver, if there's water inside it and it's under sunlight, it would release certain things that would cause leprosy. That's why they said it's makruh, haram to use water, wudu water from that vessel. This is no longer an understanding of chemistry today. It doesn't apply today. But you can understand that they were trying their best at the time to do their fiqh. And I think the same thing needs to happen for Ilm al-Kalam. Thank you very much for listening to Mashayikh. I hope that was helpful. I'm incredibly grateful again for the opportunity. Please do forgive me if I said anything wrong. Everything that is correct is from Allah. Anything that's incorrect is from me or shaitan. Barakallahu feekum. Thank you very much.
MashaAllah. Thank you for that fascinating and briefly insightful presentation. You have provided us with a brilliant framework to understand scientific and theological dimensions of this topic. Thank you once again for encouraging the engagements of scholars in such fields. So, see how beautifully these two perspectives, firstly the classical text and secondly the modern science, come together, has been truly an eye-opening session. We have now reached the final segment of our program, the question and answering session. I would like to warmly invite our audiences to share your questions for both of our esteemed speakers. Audience, you can ask the questions one after one accordingly. Please can raise your hands.
My first question is to our Shaykh Muntasir Zaman. Our Shaykh said that there is a need to tawakkuf and tarjih and jump to the hadith of about height of Prophet Adam alayhi salam. Is there any need to that tawakkuf or to tarjih or to jump? Can we simply understand about heights of prophets and imagine it in that era as adaptable for Adam alayhi salam in that environment? That environment is different from our environment.
So, Jazakallah khairan, Brother Muhammad, for the question. I'm assuming the question here is that if Adam alayhi salam was the first human, the laws of physics were largely different on Earth then. So why do we even need to see that there is a concern? The problem, if I've understood your question, is that there's two parts to the hadith. One isn't only specifically Adam alayhi salam, فَلَمْ يَزَلْ الْخَلْقِ يَنْقُصُ بَعْدَهُ حَتَّى الْآن, assumes that you have a successive continuation of this excessive height. I think that's the first thing that needs to be noted. Number two, when we talk about archaeology beyond just a science, we have human remains or remains of creatures going back millions of years and of hominids for hundreds of thousands of years, which all seem to suggest the same thing, that there was a relatively stable height. So I think the onus would be on those who say that the laws of physics were different then. And on what grounds are we saying that there was a shift? That seems a little odd, like that's the reason I would push back on that, and the reason we have to take the concern seriously. Allahu a'lam.
Assalamu alaikum. Am I audible?
Yes, brother.
So first of all, I will take this opportunity to thank Shaykh Muntasir Zaman, because I have benefited very much a lot from you, sir, especially regarding Sahih Bukhari, the textual integrity, and Al-Nasafi's work. The research was very, very, very detailed and very groundbreaking, because I am part of my studies, I am using those things. So now, first of all, I will start my question. My question is actually, sir, in this book, you have explained about the three-tier approach. In that, also in your book, you mentioned about Sheikh Hatimul Awni work regarding Manazil Hal Iskara Tahallur Baina Nususu Sharia. Right? In that, Sheikh is explaining the first step is Jam and Tarjih and Naskh. But after that, Dr. Anas Sharmini took that work and took a research, and he finally is saying from Anafi paradigm, Tarjih is the first step. If Tarjih is the first step, and you also explaining the end of your book, you are saying if two things are not equally weightage, then there is no conflict. And according to your final report is scientific empirical evidence is greater than the Hadith text. So there is no conflict, no, sir. In that case, how can we check with this Hanafi paradigm. Hanafi paradigm is saying tarjih is the first step. So can you please make it clear, sir? Thank you.
First of all, barakallah fikum, brother Anis, for your kind words. May Allah forgive me for my shortcomings. And very insightful question, for sure. The way I would answer this is several ways. Number one, when we say what are the maratib of ta'arud, right? How do we do this halul ishkal? The Hanafis would say first you start with tarjih. Some would say you start with jama'. I think we have to understand that their paradigm is a legal paradigm. They're approaching this from fiqh. That's the first thing. Whereas if you look at some contemporary scholars who are more hadith influenced, like Maulana Anwar Shah Kashmiri, they lean more into trying to find a solution. Therefore they give jama' first. This argument that tarjih should be the first approach, it makes sense and I agree with it. But as someone who is more hadith inclined, and as someone who wants to give hadith a greater chance, I do feel jama' is the more appropriate route, because why would we assume there is a conflict when we can just circumvent the objection by reconciling between the two? Now, the early scholars like Ibn al-Humam and others who tended to be much more tarjih based, for them, it was number one, based on fiqh, and number two, based on a more hadith wary approach. They tended to be a little bit more critical of the hadith tradition, at least khabar wahid. As you're saying, if there is one side stronger than the other, why do we even need to go to the other approaches? Well, this is assuming that one side is more epistemologically stronger than the other. The whole thrust of the jama' argument is they're not epistemologically stronger than the other. Rather, the science and the hadith don't even have a conflict to begin with. When there is no conflict to begin with, then the whole need for tarjih is obviated. I think that's the argument being made. Wallahu a'lam.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Shibli MK. My question is to Dr. Shoaib Malik. That it is said that our Prophet Adam alayhi salam lived about 8,000 years ago. Is there any possibility that there were other Adams before our Prophet Adam alayhi salam?
Sani, thank you very much for your question. So the idea of Adam having existed 8,000 years ago, I think this comes down from a lot of Israeliyat. In fact, like you'll find in many Christian texts that Adam alayhi salam, he was, or anywhere from 6 to 10,000 years ago. So this is part of that whole ethos of old creationism. So that's the first thing. Second, are there any Adams before Adam alayhi salam? I'm more skeptical about this because there's nothing that is from the mutawatirat that explains that. We do have a few weak hadith. There's one thing that's attributed to Ibn Arabi, that there were multiple Adams before Adam, like 1,000,000 Adams before Adam. And this part, I feel, is not based off of anything that we have that is in terms of a naqli basis. It's purely from a kashfi basis. That's at least what I've read from Akbarians. But in terms of like substantial basis for this, I haven't really seen much. I feel like it's speculation. It's not qat'i at all, in my opinion. It's pure speculation, in my opinion. Allahu alam.
Assalamu alaikum. I hope my voice is clearly. Thank you for Shaykh Muntasir and Dr. Shoaib Ahmed Malik. First of all, we know that hadith is classified as ahad, and ahad it means zonic knowledge. But in my understanding, maybe you can explain and make clear in my understanding, scientific findings sometimes also we can say zonni, because it's it is from the istiqra nakis, right? In istiqra nakis, it's same zone like ahad, and in the specific case, the Prophet Adam alayhi salam is the scientific cannot access fully. Maybe we can say in the future we can know clearly from the scientific, but scientific now cannot access fully from the Zahir al-Hadith. And you say, Sheikh Muntasir, maybe we can say the mu'jizat, this is possible. Uh, this is possible. Harikun lil ada. In this case, can we talk about there is possibility, but the probability? I mean, possibility and probability. There is the right. Maybe you can clear my understanding. Thank you.
Barakallah fikum. Really good question. So yes, scientific arguments aren't necessarily always definitive and qat'i. Just like historical reports, they're on a spectrum. Some of them are mere theories, some of them are facts. And the purpose of tarjih, at least, is to see what's the degree of confidence that we get from the scientific information. Yes, it's an istiqra. Is the istiqra naqis? 100%. At some level, we're talking about the past. Archaeological remains, until you excavate every single human body, you will never have istiqra tam. And the scientific knowledge, yeah, it's not the idea of how bodies function. We don't have living creatures or living hominids from 10,000, 100,000, 200,000 years before for us to conduct any meaningful research on it. But we do have a general understanding of how human anatomy works and how biology works. So the argument isn't that the science is qat'i and the hadith is dhanni. The argument is, while both are dhanni, how do we determine the one that has stronger grounds for preference? And I show that while the hadith is dhanni, its dhanniya is actually more, because it's not only khabar wahid, but there's already ikhtilaf among the students from Abu Huraira on the inclusion of this. So I think that's to your first question. To your second question of the mu'jizat, probability versus possibility, yes, I agree with you. And that's my point, that is it possible that a mu'jiza could have occurred? Yes, but it's not probable given that the evidence isn't strong enough to be suggestive of such a drastic shift. So I'm just putting out the possibility of a mu'jiza out there just because that's something that's mumkin, but it's not necessarily the route that we should go for given the scant evidence. Wallahu alam.
Hello. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Lukman Lakim. I am now currently got admitted to Science and Religion program at the University of Edinburgh. Shoaib Malik, I have some communication with you. You remember me. So, in your question, my question is, I have two questions. First one is the previous question. Zaki told that there are some kind of istiqra. So the problem I want to ask you is that in your book you said that there are problems with if you understand the Adam alayhi salam is cystic with but that is a problem with physics and biology, not only evolution or any other evolutionary biology or just like that. We can understand how it will be the weight and mass. There will be some conflict. So I think how will we configure that? Another thing is I am greatly influenced by your work, Islam and evolution. So my position is Adamic exceptionalism. So I want to ask you that your personal opinion. Also, I think for me personally, I think we must, or at the with the scientific evidences we have from genetic data and beta homoglobin, we are the same in the chimpanzee or just like that, or another data ERV. This data suggests that we have to integrate or uh, or avoid the contradiction between hadiths and the evolutionary biology. So I want we can say that what is your opinion about the Adam explanation is strong for me.
Barakallahu fiik. So I didn't understand the question. So for the second one, because I wanted to start from there, are you saying that the science is qat'i or not? Was that the question about whether the biology and all of that is that qat'i? Did I understand you correctly there, Sidi Luqman?
Yeah, to some extent, I would say.
Yeah. So so here's a general thing that I have, right? One of the first works that I ever read on evolution, like I'm talking about from ulama, right? This is a scholar by the name of Hussein al-Jisr. Hussein al-Jisr, he wrote a Risala al-Hamidiyya. It won the award for, I think, by the Khalifa at the time, Abdul Hamid II. I think he's the one who published this work due to like some kind of award that he had. And in that particular work, he has about 50 pages of evolution. He discusses in there, right? And what does Hussein? It's one of the most composed works I've ever seen on evolution, at least from trained ulama, right? And Hussein al-Jisr, he says that when it comes to the metaphysics of evolution, we reject it if it's under the package of Dhahriya, yani eternalists, materialists. This is something we reject. So he was stripping away the metaphysical side. Then he said, hermeneutically, and scripturally, from a naqli perspective, can we accommodate it? Yes. But he doesn't actually explain what he means by yes here. Then he says, from the scientific angle, in his time, it was not qat'i, right? And bear in mind, back in those days, in 1895, there was no concept of genes and genetics. That only came up in the 1930s. And so he said that because it's dhanni, I don't have any need to connect. I don't have any need to kind of do some kind of jama'ah here. Now the problem is, since then, 150 years later, I agree with you. There's so much genetic evidence. There's endogenous retroviruses. There's all kinds of things that you can find. Yet what I find sometimes is that people will always say, nope, it's dhanni. Nope, it's dhanni. Nope, it's dhanni. And the question that I'm now coming to think of is, then when is empirical science ever going to be qat'i enough for somebody, right? And this is a question that I think that people are struggling with. Just yesterday, I was speaking to a very good brother. He's a very nice brother. Me and him disagree on some things, on evolution. But I was talking about this, like, for example, that human-chimp ancestry, the genetic evidence for that with ERVs, endogenous, for me, it's qat'i. It's impossible to reject it. But he says, no, like in some things in science, there's openness. Some things in science, there's a lot of ambiguity. So say it fine enough. And my problem is, like, I want to know, when then can something scientific can ever be qat'i for people? And I feel like it's because of this divide between hukm aqli, which is always qat'i. Hukm aqli is always qat'i, right? And hukm adi, which will never be qat'i in that full sense of aqli side. Because of this gap, I feel people can always pull it's dhanni card. That's what I feel. And I think a lot of tahqiq needs to be done in this area. Mufti Saab's book, in fact, he sent me a book by Mufti Saab. Remember that Jordanian scholar, the one who did that teach dissertation? So he's somebody who's tried to attempt to do that in the field of hadith studies. But I feel like there needs to be more work in this space. Like, when is an empirical science demonstrably qat'i? And I think that's a question that we need to start exploring. And I feel like different Muslims that I ask, some people who are already convinced that evolution is wrong, they'll also say it's dhanni. They'll also say it's dhanni. It's never qat'i. So I feel like this is where we need to have some, I think, more investigation. So for me personally, I'm convinced. I think that is very clear. For others, they're not convinced. They think it's just people's metaphysics. I know, for example, one individual, he says that, oh, this is just the bias of the academy. They're convinced by they just want evolution and they want to convince the world evolution is true. But there's no evidence here. I'm not saying, how do you know there's evidence here? Have you studied the evidence? So I feel like there's a lot of gray areas here, CD. I don't know if that answers your question, CD Luqman.
Yes, that answers. That was my question too. From the time of Darwin, we can say it is one, but at the end of 1920s, and the neo-Darwinian argument is more strong. So,
Sorry, CD Luqman, there's somebody's mic is on. I can't hear you. Somebody else's mic is on. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, I can now hear you. Go ahead, CD Luqman.
yeah, that is why I'm saying too. From the time of Darwin, it is we can say it is only, and but at the advent of neo-Darwinian genetical data, we can say it is that way. So
yeah,
another thing is, as I read your paper in using the philosophy of science in creationism debate. So I have a great understanding that some of the people use these induction, problem of induction, that is historical, those kind of data to undermine the evolution. So I see the correct study, the methodologically strong, rigorous is would be great for this kind of discussions.
Yeah.
CD, Shoaib, and host, I sincerely apologize. I'll be having to head out in a few moments. I know there are a number of questions remaining as well. I'm not sure what Dr. Shoaib's timing is, if he plans on staying for the Q&A. I just have some other commitments to get to. So maybe I can just leave it to the host to decide. I would have to leave in like 3-4 minutes. What's the best course of action? My apologies. I didn't mean to interject.
Considering your convenience, I hope you can have a dedicated session with you in future about such discussions, inshallah. So, considering your convenience, wish you a very well future. Thank you a lot. Thank you so much, Shaykh Muntasir Zaman, for that fascinating and deeply insightful presentation.